So I am Sara Mannen, so we're clear on who I am. As Jasmine said, I graduated this May from the seminary. I have my master's in theological studies, so woo-woo. And it's through the seminary that I became part of New Wine, New Wineskin. I was kind of sucked in through the Buddhist evangelical dialogues, and I haven't left, and they can't get rid of me, so I think, they'll have to deal with me. My husband always says that it's not me dealing with him, it's not him dealing with me, it's me dealing with him. But, so maybe that's the way they feel about me here too. But I'm going to speak to you guys on blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of God. And I want to acknowledge up front how weird and awkward it is to talk about this beatitude, because simply teaching and reflecting usually implies some sort of authority or knowledge on a subject, which kind of goes against the very idea of the beatitude itself, which says we don't really have any spiritual riches of our own to impart. And so I just want to say up front, I know that's kind of just an awkward place to be in, and I know that. So I'm going to do the best I can to teach you guys a little bit about what the Lord has taught me about being poor in spirit. So, as I was reflecting on this, in many ways, my own walk with Christ starts with this beatitude. For those of you who know me at all, you'll know that you could probably describe me as a driven person, just slightly. I'm really goal-focused. I get stuff done. You give me something to do, I'll do it. I'll get it done. That's just how I roll. Obviously, you guys can hear the poverty of spirit I have, like right there. But that's my personality. I'm a driven person. I'm accomplished. That's just who I am. So in high school, I meet this guy through a new church we started attending, and it was an older gentleman in our church. I was doing a C.S. Lewis play for our church. Obviously, good evangelical, my faith story starts with C.S. Lewis, right? But he had a joy and a peace that I could not describe, this gentleman did. And he was going through intense personal struggles in his family life, and just pervaded Christ. I didn't know that at the time that's what it was. And I'm like, I want that. I want what that guy has, because that is amazing. I knew I didn't have what he had. And so naturally, being a goal-oriented person, I'm like, I'm going to get that. I'm going to figure it out. And so I try over and over again over the course of 6 months, maybe I just need to be a better person, or stop the sins in my life, and that will be how I'll get what he had, I'll get that joy and that peace and that love. And over again I fail. And every Sunday as we sit in church, I pray the sinner's prayer. You guys are all probably very familiar with that prayer. I prayed it probably 100 times, I'm not kidding you guys. And then, they do at every good church service where you have a sinner's prayer. What do you have to do after the sinner's prayer? You got to raise your hand, right? I could not raise my hand. I couldn't do it, because that was a public acknowledgement that I was praying this prayer and that I couldn't do this thing on my own. So I get to this point of 6 months of this continual pattern of me failing and praying the prayer and nothing changing in my life. We get to Easter Sunday, and it's like all of a sudden I'm just completely crushed, and I realize I can't do this. And it's as I come to that recognition, like, God, I cannot do this. I can't get whatever he had. I'm not going to be able to get that. So that Sunday, I raised my hand with my family sitting there, bawling my eyes out. Which, if you guys know me, well, the only place I really cry anymore is Dr. Metzger's office, but that's a different story. Not a huge crier, so that was a really big deal for me. And that's the day I consider the day that I was saved, because that's the day God broke me of any sort of pride I had that I could achieve some sort of salvation or some sort of joy and peace. It was once God crushed my perception that I could accomplish that on my own, that I believe was the day that I entered the kingdom, was that day. And so that's where my salvation story starts. And so I think it's a lesson that God teaches me over and over again, because I have pride all the time. And so God gave me incredibly wonderful daughters who crushed my ability to think that I could be a good mom on my own. So, or just life, God brings those things in to keep me humble. But I work in banking, and you guys are gonna be like, okay, it's kind of a weird little transition. I've worked in banking my whole entire adult life. It's just the way my life worked out, not how I'd all planned it. And so as we talk about being poor in spirit, spiritual poverty, or being spiritually bankrupt, really having nothing to bring before God, I really think there's a striking parallel to financial bankruptcy. And I want to say right off the bat that if you guys have experienced financial bankruptcy, I am not judging you at all, because I know from firsthand experience dealing with people the magnitude of different causes to that and how often it is tragedy and the unexpected in your life. So don't all feel like if that's a situation you've been in that's what I'm saying about you, because I see it all the time. But that what happens in financial bankruptcy is if you come into where I work and you want to secure a debt, you don't have any way to do it. You don't even have a good name that says that you will repay your debts anymore. And I think that this is really our position before God. It's the same way. We come to God with nothing to secure our debts, with not even a good name, a good credit score behind us. Like, God, look at my credit score, it's 781. Like we don't have that at all. And that is our exact position before the Lord. We don't have anything to secure our place in the kingdom of heaven, and not our name, not our righteousness, not our works. And this is where the Lord starts with his Beatitudes and his upside down kingdom. He starts us with this completely upside down idea that we come into the kingdom by acknowledging we don't have a place in the kingdom. We don't deserve to be there. How upside down is this from the world we live in? Because the world we live in, any kingdom in our world, what do you have to do? You have to earn your place in that kingdom, right? You work in corporate America, you better climb that ladder. And you're going to climb the ladder by being the best, or by stabbing enough people in the back, or however it is. We earn our place in the kingdoms of the world. We allow people with power, with money, with skill, the self-made man. That's a narrative we hear all the time. And that is what we are told is how we earn a place in the kingdoms of the world. And our God says, nope. We start at the exact opposite place of that. We start by recognizing that we come to the Lord with nothing. We're poor in spirit. And I think the Lord starts here because this gets at the heart of our universal human pride. So many of the commentators will tell you on this beatitude that the Lord starts here and all the rest of them build from it and then kind of point back to it. It's all kind of building on this beatitude of being poor in spirit. The idea that we depend on God fully. And as I think about this, I see a lot of little kids here. So my daughters are 9 and 11. When my youngest was about 18 months and could start stringing together sentences, her first sentence and her often most repeated sentence was, I got it. I got it. So trying to put on her shoes at 18 months, I got it, Mom. I got it. Like as a parent, you're like, oh my gosh, you don't got it. Please let me help you. But that attitude of hers, I think is really kind of our universal attitude, right? I got it. We don't say it like a little toddler when we're struggling with our shoes, but it's often how we stand before the Lord and before others. I got it. I got it. And when I was thinking about this, I was actually reading through, that's going to go there. I don't know where to put it. So I'll be like my kids, just throw it on the floor right now. So I came across the story of Peter when right before Jesus' crucifixion. And I think Peter gives us a really beautiful example of what it means to be poor in spirit. And so I wanted to go to Matthew 26, in verse 30 through 35, I'll read it to you guys. And when they had sung a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. Then Jesus said to them, you will all fall away because of me this night. For it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter answered him, though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Jesus said to him, truly I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter said to him, even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same. And I love Peter because Peter, I think, is all of us in so many ways. He's so enthusiastic, but can you hear his pride in this? Like, I won't fall away. I won't deny you. I will die with you, Lord. And we all know the story. What does Peter do? He denies Jesus 3 times. And at the very end of Matthew 26, it says, and Peter remembered the saying of Jesus, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. And I think those tears were the tears of a broken man and of a man whose spirit had been crushed. He knew he was poor in spirit in that moment when he denied his Lord. He loved Jesus. I really do believe Peter loved Jesus. I don't doubt that for a second. But he knew what he'd done. And he knew he had so much pride, like, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to fall away, Lord. What are you talking about? And then he does the exact opposite of it. And it's in that moment of being totally crushed by his own sin, by his own inability to do what he said, that he weeps these bitter tears. And I think those are the tears of someone who is truly broken in spirit. And then we know the rest of the story. In John 21, Jesus restores Peter. And this is what I love about this, is at the end of John 21, when he's talking to Peter, he says, truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted, but when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. So Peter, at the beginning, says, I will die for you, Lord. And ultimately we know what happens, right? Peter does die for his Lord, but it was after he'd been disabused of any sort of idea that it was in his own strength and his own power that he was going to do that. So the Lord restores him and ultimately says, you are going to die for me, Peter. But it's the broken Peter who is poor in spirit that goes and dies for the Lord. And I think it's from that too that we all know God uses Peter in mighty ways to establish the church, spread the gospel, bring the kingdom on earth. But it was after his denial and after Peter is crushed in his spirit and knows what he has done and what he is incapable of doing without his dependence on the Lord. So this is Christ's kingdom. This is the kingdom of heaven. And we enter through recognizing our spiritual poverty. We all go through our own Peter breaking experiences. Sometimes once, sometimes many times. But I think Peter's just a really beautiful example of it. And it's only fitting that the kingdom of heaven is entered through poverty of spirit because God establishes the kingdom through his own descent to us. It's Christ, the second member of the Trinity, the Son, taking on human flesh, becoming a man, taking on the form of a servant, humbling himself to the point of death. And out of his abundance, he willingly humbles himself so that we might inherit his riches. So God starts us, the Beatitudes start us with spiritual poverty, but this is just a reflection of how God brings his kingdom to earth to begin with. Begins with a God who willingly becomes us, who willingly walks the earth and lives our life, and to bring us into his kingdom. And this is what amazes me about God's upside down kingdom, is God's kingdom doesn't come with power and might in the way that the world thinks of power and might. Because when we think of power and might, we think of the sword, we think of money. You know, it's a force, it's a coercive force that we think of when we think of power and might in this world, right? When kingdoms come in this world, they don't come the way Christ came to establish his kingdom. Christ comes to establish his kingdom. The power that Christ's kingdom comes with is that of persuasive love. It's the power of persuasive love that humbles us. And that is how Christ brings his kingdom. The kingdom of heaven comes through this persuasive power of humbling love, not the power of force that our kingdom of the world come with. And that's why we start with being poor in spirit, because that is how God ultimately brings his kingdom to this earth. So Jesus' promise to those who are poor in spirit is that theirs is the kingdom. So this is a present tense verb in Greek. The rest of the Beatitudes, except for the last one on the persecution, they're all in the future tense. But this one is present, and it says, theirs is the kingdom. This is a present reality for those who are poor in spirit. It's not a a future, you're going to get this someday. This is, if you're poor in spirit, the kingdom is now. And so I think there's two, and obviously there's tension in the Bible with the kingdom of heaven being now, not yet, here, not here, and all those things. But for this beatitude, Jesus is giving a now promise to them, for theirs is the kingdom. And I think there's two important things to think about when we think about the kingdom of heaven being present now for those who are poor in spirit. And one is that as a present reality, we have God's abiding presence with us. So we have the abiding presence of God with us through the Holy Spirit as He's uniting us to Christ. And it's because we are dependent and reliant on Him. As we depend and rely on Him, the Spirit brings out that unity we have with Christ. We experience the Father's love. And in that sense, we experience the kingdom now. I think there's also other sense that's really important as well. And that is that we're part of the kingdom of heaven now on earth, as a community together. So the poor in spirit is not just me, it's all of us. It's all of us who are part of the kingdom of heaven. All of the poor in spirit are part of the kingdom of heaven. And we're part of this community of the kingdom on earth. We're bringing the kingdom. We are living the kingdom now. We're displaying Christ's kingdom rule and His upside down kingdom now. And yes, that one goes on the floor too. So I have just a couple thoughts. I know I'm probably going over. Sorry. So as part of the kingdom of heaven, I have just, we are those who are spiritually impoverished, or a community of spiritually impoverished together. And so I have just two thoughts I had on what that might look like, because, just thinking about what does it mean that all of us together are spiritually impoverished? Like, what would that look like? What does that even mean for us as the church? We should be a community that is throwing ourselves at Christ's feet together, relying on Him. And so there's two things I want to address. One is pride is so insidious in nature, isn't it? It just weaves itself into things. It's almost imperceptible that it's there. And so one of the ways that this is my assessment, you guys can feel free to disagree with me, just letting you know. This is Sara Mannen, like exegesis of the church. You can feel free to disagree. One of the ways I see pride in the church all the time is what I call brokenness culture. So brokenness culture is when I hear this all the time from church leaders or people in leadership, we're all broken people. I'm just a very broken person. We talk about how broken we are all the time. And I find that really interesting because we all know it's bad to be a Pharisee, right? We've read the Gospels. We kind of get that being a Pharisee isn't what we want to do. So instead of being a Pharisee, now we talk about how broken and humble we are. It's this kind of backwardness. So we're pointing back to our own spiritual, what we think it is to be a good disciple. We know it's good to be humble as disciples and recognize our sin. So now we point back to that by talking about how broken we are all the time. And some people can generally say this. This is just an in general Sara opinion. So, but what I find interesting about this is that it can sweep sin under the carpet and not really deal with how terrible some of our sin is. Because we can swipe it under like, well, we're all broken. But, I sexually abuse that person. Or, like we've been hearing from some of our church leaders who won't call it that. But, we just swipe it under the carpet. We don't really actually deal with the magnitude of our sin because we swipe it under the carpet of being a broken person like everybody else. That is not spiritual poverty. Spiritual poverty looks in the face of its sin and recognizes how truly awful it is and doesn't try to talk it away under brokenness. So, that's my little rant. You got a little Sara rant, sorry.
Amen. No rant.
Oh yeah, they're working on me not saying sorry all the time. I came from a really terrible church situation and I say sorry a lot, and so I'm trying to break this habit. So if you hear me say sorry and I shouldn't be sorry, you say stop it, don't say sorry.
Spiritual pride, Sara.
Yeah. But that's my first thing. But my question is, if kind of always pointing out our brokenness isn't true spiritual poverty, and I think some of us do it because we're genuinely trying to be like, look, I am a sinner. How do we as a community encourage one another to be poor in spirit, but without spiritual showmanship. I don't know what that looks like, but it's something I think we need to reflect on. What does encouraging each other to be poor in spirit look like without it then becoming a competition to be the really poor in spirit? And that's what I mean by pride is so insidious, because it works into these things and we don't even realize it. The other thing I wanted to reflect on is our culture is super divided right now, in case you guys hadn't noticed. Our churches are divided. We've got progressive and conservative breaches in the evangelical church. They're getting further and further apart. The lines politically or culturally in our country are becoming further and further apart. And I was like, if we enter the community of the kingdom through poverty of spirit, shouldn't this be at the forefront of all of the church's dealings with all the communities? So with each other and with the communities in our world and our culture. Personally, I don't see the church engaging the world and culture from a posture that would indicate poverty of spirit. I feel like we often act like once we have entered God's kingdom that we kind of got it all together. Like, yeah, I was a sinner, but now I'm part of the, like we kind of have this position of almost superiority of how we engage. And I'm not saying this is like a general, this isn't like this part of the church or that part or this political party or this party. It's all of us, and me included. So we kind of come with this position of superiority as we engage the different parts of our culture and our world as a community. At least that's my perspective. And especially with those that we disagree with in and outside the church. So how would recognizing that our position is spiritually poor, who are completely dependent on God for everything, not just our salvation, but like the fact that I'm breathing, that I have any skills at all, that's all from God. And it's the same for every one of us here. But how would recognizing that we are spiritually poor, we're completely dependent on God, change the way we view, treat, and interact with those inside and outside the church? How would that change? What would it look like to be a community that starts with the poor in spirit in our minds first and foremost as we go out and interact with our world? And how would that change our current cultural divisiveness? That's just something I thought might be good to reflect on, because I don't know, I think it might be a game changer for God's upside down kingdoms if we start with that. I think that being poor in spirit is a lifetime thing that God is always working on that in us. It's so easy to be prideful and to, I do it as I'm coming here, I'm thinking about, I wonder how nicely they're going to introduce me. You're not getting the beatitude, you're teaching on, woman. This is how I talk to myself. So I ran across this great quote, and it's in the William Kelly commentary, and it's talking about this beatitude. He said, God knows how to bring a man down if he's forgotten his true place. And I think that's something that the Lord does as we struggle with being poor in spirit. So as those who have the kingdom, now we're living it out as God's kingdom ambassadors on earth. May we continually recognize our poverty before a gracious God who lifts us up to be lights in the world.